Welcome. Welcome to NCERT Biology Reading. NCERT Biology Class 11, Chapter 11 Transport in Plants, 11.3 Long Distance Transport of Water. At some earlier stages, you might have carried out an experiment where you had placed a twig bearing white flowers in colored water and had watched it turn color. On examining the cut end of the twig after a few hours, you had noted the region through which the colored water moved. That experiment very easily demonstrates that the path of water movement is through the vascular bundles, more especially the xylem. Now we have to go further and try and understand the mechanism of movement of water and other substances up a plant. Long distance transport of substances within a plant cannot be diffusion alone. Diffusion is a slow process. It can account for only short distance movement of molecules. For example, the movement of a molecule across a typical plant cell about 50 micrometer takes approximately 2.5 seconds. At this rate, can you calculate how many years it would take for the movement of molecules over the distance of 1 meter within a plant by diffusion alone? In large and complex organisms, often substances have to be moved to long distances. Sometimes the sites of production or absorption and sites of storage are too far from each other. Diffusion or active transport would not suffice. Special long distance transport system became necessary so that to move substances across long distance and at much faster rate. Water and minerals and food are generally moved by a mass or bulk flow system. Mass flow is the movement of substances in bulk or n mass from the point to another as a result of pressure differences between the 2 points. It is a characteristic of mass flow that substances, whether in solution or in suspension, are swept along at the same pace as in flowing river. This is unlike diffusion, where different substances move independently depending on their concentration gradients. Bulk flow can be achieved either through a positive hydrostatic pressure gradient, example, a garden hose, or a negative hydrostatic pressure gradient, example, suction through a straw. The bulk movement of substances through the conduiting or vascular tissue of plant is called translocation. Do you remember studying cross sections of roots, stems, and leaves of higher plants and studying the vascular system? The higher plants have highly specialized vascular tissues, xylem and phloem. Xylem is associated with the translocation of mainly water, minerals, salts, some organic nitrogens, and hormones from roots to the aerial parts of the plants. The phloem translocates a variety of organic and inorganic solutes mainly from the leaves to the other parts of the plants. 11.3.1 How do plants absorb water? We know that the root absorb most of the water that goes into plants. Obviously, that is why we apply water to the soil and not on to the leaves. The responsibility of absorption of water and minerals is more specifically the function of the root hairs that are present in millions at the tip of the roots. Root hairs are thin-walled, slender extensions of root epidermal cells that greatly increase the surface area for absorption. Water is absorbed along with mineral solutes by the root hairs purely by diffusion. Once water is absorbed by the root hairs, it can move deeper into the roots layer by two distinct pathways. One is apoplastic pathway, another one is symplastic pathway. Apoplast pathway and symplast pathway. The apoplast is the system of adjacent cell wall that is continuous through the plant, except at the Casparin strips of the endodermis in the roots, figure 11.6. The apoplast movement of water occurs exclusively through the intercellular spaces and the walls of the cells. Movement through the apoplast does not involve crossing the cell membrane. This movement is dependent on the gradient. The apoplast does not provide any barrier to water movement, and water movement is through mass flow. As water evaporates into the intercellular spaces or the atmosphere, tension develops in the continuous stream of water in the apoplast. Hence, mass flow of water occurs due to the adhesive and cohesive properties of water. The symplastic system is the system of interconnected protoplast. Neighboring cells are connected through cytoplasmic strands that extend through the plasmodesmata. During symplastic movement, the water travels through the cells. Their cytoplasm intercellular movement is through the plasmodesmata. Water has to enter the cells through the cell membrane. Hence, the movement is relatively slower. Movement is again down a potential gradient. Symplastic movement may be aided by cytoplasmic streaming. You may have observed cytoplasmic streaming in cells of the hydrilla leaf. The movement of the chloroplast due to streaming is easily visible. Most of the water flow in the roots occurs via the apoplast since the cortical cells are loosely packed and hence offer no resistance to water movement. However, the inner boundary of the cortex, the endodermis, is impervious to water because of a band of suberized matrix called the Casparin strips. Water molecules are unable to penetrate the layer, so they are directed to wall regions that are not suberized into the cells proper through the membranes. The water then moves through the symplast and again crosses a membrane to reach the cells of the xylem. The movement of water through the root layer is ultimately symplastic in the endodermis. This is the only way water and other solutes can enter the vascular cylinder. Once inside the xylem, water is again free to move between cells as well as through the stem. Well as through them. In young roots, water enters directly into the xylem vessels and or tracheids. These are non-living conduits and so are parts of the apoplast. The path of the water and mineral ions into the root vascular system is summarized in figure 11.7. Some plants have additional structures associated with them that help in water and mineral absorption. A mycorrhiza is a symbiotic association of the fungus with a root system. The fungus filaments form a network around the young root or they penetrate the root cells. The hyphae have a very large surface area that absorb mineral ions and soil water from the soil from a much larger volume of soil that perhaps a root cannot do. The fungus provides minerals and water to the roots. In turn, the roots provide sugar and nitrogen containing compounds to the mycorrhizae. Some plants have an obligate association with the mycorrhizae. For example, pine seeds cannot germinate and establish without the presence of mycorrhizae. 11.3.2 Water movement of a plant. We look at how plants absorb water from the soil and move it into the vascular tissues. We now have to try and understand how this water is transported to various parts of the plant. Is the water movement active or is it still passive? Since the water has to be moved up a stem against gravity, what provides the energy for this? 11.3.2.1 Root pressure. As various ions from the soil are actively transported into the vascular tissue of the roots, water follows its potential gradient and increases the pressure inside the xylem. This positive pressure is called the root pressure and can be responsible for pushing up water to small heights in the stem. How can we see that root pressure exists? Choose a small soft stemmed plant and on a day when there is a plenty of atmospheric moisture, cut the stem horizontally near the base with a sharp blade early in the morning. You will soon see drops of solution ooze out of the cut stem. This comes out due to the positive root pressure. If you fix a rubber tube to the cut stem as a sieve, you can actually collect and measure the rate of exudation and also determine the composition of the exudate. Effects of root pressure is also observable at night and early morning when evaporation is low. And excess water collects in the form of droplets around the special opening of veins near the tip of the grass blades and leaves of many herbaceous plants. Such water loss in its liquid phase is known as guttation. Root pressure can at best only provide a modest push in the overall process of water transport. They obviously do not play a major role in water movement up tall trees. The greatest contribution of root pressure may be to re-establish the continuous chains of water molecules in the xylem, which often break under the enormous tensions created by transpiration. Root pressure does not account for the majority of water transport. Most plants meet their need by transpiratory pull. 11.3.2.2 transpiration pull. Despite the absence of a heart or a circulatory system in plants, the upward flow of water through the xylem in plants can achieve fairly high rates up to 15 meters per hour. How is this movement accomplished? A long standing question is whether the water is pushed or pulled through the plant. Most researchers agree that water is mainly pulled through the plant and that the driving force for this process is transpiration from the leaves. This is referred to as cohesion tension transpiration pull model of water transport. But what generates this transpiration pull? Water is transpiration in plants. Water is transient in plants. Less than 1% of the water reaching the leaves is used in photosynthesis and plant growth. Most of it is through the stomata in the leaves. Most of it is lost through the stomata in the leaves. This water loss is known as transpiration. You have studied transpiration in an earlier class by enclosing a healthy plant in polythene bag and observing the droplets of water formed inside the bag. You could also study water loss from a leaf using cobalt chloride paper which stands color in absorbing water. Thank you.